The Napoleonic algorithm, the forbidden history. How could Napoleon Bonaparte, a minor aristocrat from a backwater island, manage to bring the entire world to its knees in less than a decade? We are told it was his genius. We are told it was the spirit of the revolution. But the truth is much colder, much more terrifying. Imagine the year 1812, the heights of Borodino. The air is thick with the scent of blood and burnt oats. While his marshals are screaming for orders, Napoleon is not looking at the battlefield. He is inside a specialized carriage, staring at a brass cabinet the size of a piano. Inside, 10,000 tiny gears are spinning with a rhythmic, inhuman precision. He feeds a small slip of paper into a slot. A few seconds later, the machine spits out a card with a single coordinate. Napoleon steps out, points his finger, and says, "Fire the 12-pounders there, now." The resulting strike decapitates the Russian defense. It wasn't luck. It wasn't military intuition. It was a calculation. Today, we believe artificial intelligence is a product of the 21st century. We think we are the first generation to fear the machine. We are wrong. The first AI didn't run on electricity. It ran on steam, brass, and the cold ambition of a man who wanted to play God. Why did this technology vanish? Because the winners realized that if the world knew the truth, no king or president would ever be seen as legitimate again. It all began in 1798. Napoleon invaded Egypt. History says he went there to cut off British trade routes. Science says he went there to discover the Rosetta Stone. The secret archives tell a different story. Among the 167 scholars Napoleon brought with him were not just historians, but the most advanced clockmakers and cryptographers of France. In the subterranean chambers beneath the Temple of Dendera, they didn't find gold. They found a series of logical tablets, ancient designs of a mechanical brain, preserved since the time of the Ptolemies. The society of the time demanded, "Destroy these pagan idols. They are works of the devil." But Napoleon's reaction surprised even his inner circle. He saw beyond the superstition. He saw a way to automate the world. He said, "A man can be tired, a man can be bribed, a man can be afraid, but a gear only knows the truth." Upon his return to Paris, Napoleon launched Project Arithmetique. He seized a wing of the Tuileries Palace and filled it with high-precision lathes. He recruited Pierre-Simon Laplace, the man who claimed he had no need for the hypothesis of God, to write the first algorithms. By 1802, the prototype was ready. They called it the Grand Controller. It was a massive steam-powered analytical engine that could process the movements of 100,000 men as if they were pieces on a chessboard. It was the birth of the first algorithmic empire. Napoleon is famous for the Code Napoleon, the legal framework that still governs much of Europe. But how did one man rewrite the laws of 1,000 years in just a few months? He didn't. The machine did. Napoleon realized that human society is just a set of variables: tax rates, caloric intake of peasants, birth rates, and the speed of a horse-drawn message. He fed these variables into the Grand Controller. The machine revealed something shocking. Justice is just a mathematical equilibrium. The code was not written by lawyers. It was the output of a processor. This is why it was so efficient. It was the first time in history that a state was managed not by the whims of a king, but by the logic of the system. This decision was surprisingly soft for a dictator, yet brutally efficient. He eliminated discrimination based on birth, not because he was a humanist, but because the machine calculated that meritocracy yields a 30% higher tax return and a 15% more loyal infantry. Everything, from the width of the streets in Paris to the price of bread, was optimized by the engine. Napoleon became the first technocrat. He wasn't ruling France. He was presiding over a simulation. The greatest proof of the Napoleonic AI came in 1805 at the Battle of Austerlitz. You've seen the maps. You've heard the story of the son of Austerlitz. But look at the details. Napoleon intentionally thinned his right flank. He invited the superior Russo-Austrian forces to attack him. To any human general, this was suicide. Marshal Davout thought the emperor had gone mad. But back in the command tent, the brass gears were humming. The engine had processed the soil density of the Goldbach stream and the psychological profile of Tsar Alexander I. The machine predicted that the Tsar's ego would force him to strike the weak flank at exactly 8:15 a.m. The machine was right. The French counterattack was timed to the second. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. When the smoke cleared, 30,000 Russians and Austrians were dead or captured. The French losses, negligible. Napoleon didn't celebrate. He simply walked to the engine, wiped a drop of oil from a copper plate, and whispered, "Checkmate." This was the peak. Between 1805 and 1810, Napoleon was invincible because he was the only player on the field who was seeing the world in high definition while everyone else was playing in the dark. But Britain was watching. The British Navy was the most powerful in the world, but they were losing. Their spies in Paris, the Black Cabinet, reported a strange sound coming from the emperor's study, a constant, rhythmic tick-tick-tick. The Prime Minister realized that Britain was facing a superior intelligence. In 1808, the British government secretly funded a young, obsessed mathematician named Charles Babbage. In our history books, Babbage failed to build his difference engine. That is a lie. Babbage didn't fail, he succeeded. But he didn't build it for the public. He built it for the Admiralty. The British created the Leviathan engine, a massive coal-burning processor hidden in the basement of a building in London. The Napoleonic Wars suddenly shifted. It was no longer a war of soldiers. It was the first cyber war. The British began poisoning the data. They sent false reports about ship movements, designed specifically to trigger logic errors in Napoleon's Grand Controller. They created information noise. Every time Napoleon's machine predicted a Spanish retreat, the British Babbage engine counter-calculated a guerrilla strike. Two machines were now fighting over the fate of Europe. The soldiers were just the hardware being consumed by the software. Why did Napoleon invade Russia? Every historian says it was his biggest mistake. No, Napoleon was not a man who made mistakes. He invaded because the Grand Controller told him to. No, there was a problem. A data poisoning event occurred. In June 1812, as the Grande Armée crossed the Niemen River, the Grand Controller issued a terrifying output. Probability of success, 100%. Russian capitulation in 20 days. The machine was wrong. Why? Because the Russian landscape was the first black swan event in the history of AI. The Russian strategy of scorched earth, burning their own food, their own homes, was an irrational variable. The French AI, built on European logic, could not comprehend a people who would destroy themselves to win. The machine began to hallucinate. As Napoleon sat in a burning Moscow, the Grand Controller was still spitting out cards saying, "Victory achieved. Tsar Alexander will sign the peace treaty in 2 hours." He waited. 2 hours passed. 2 days. 2 weeks. The Tsar never came. The Russian winter began. The engine, designed for the temperate climate of France, began to seize up. The oil froze in the gears. The brass expanded and cracked. For the first time in 15 years, Napoleon was alone. He didn't have his god anymore. He had to lead like a human. And that is when he realized he had forgotten how to do it. The retreat from Moscow was not just a military defeat, it was a total system crash. The end came in 1815. Waterloo. Napoleon had escaped exile from Elba. He had one last chance. He had rebuilt a smaller, portable version of the engine, but the British were ready. Charles Babbage had developed something new, the signal interceptor. At Waterloo, Napoleon sent a message to Marshal Grouchy to bring reinforcements. In our history, we are told Grouchy got lost. The truth? The British hacked the communication. They intercepted the French semaphore signals and replaced them with false data. They redirected Grouchy to a void. At the same time, the British engine predicted the exact moment the French Imperial Guard would lose their morale. When Wellington said, "Everything depends on the arrival of the Prussians," he wasn't hoping for luck. He was looking at his watch, waiting for the Babbage calculation to come true. Napoleon, staring through his telescope, saw the Prussians appear on his flank. He looked at his machine. The machine was silent. It had been jammed. He turned to his aide and said, "The machine has betrayed me. Or perhaps the world has become too chaotic for the machine." After Waterloo, the winners of the war, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, did something unprecedented. They didn't just exile Napoleon, they erased his technology. They realized that if the common people knew that a mechanical box could rule more effectively than a king, the age of monarchs would end overnight. They couldn't allow the democratization of intelligence. The Grand Controller was seized by the British and taken to an underground vault in the Tower of London. Babbage was ordered to officially fail his projects. The French scholars who worked on the engine were either pensioned off into silence or disappeared. History was rewritten. They turned Napoleon into a romantic hero. They buried the brass gears under a mountain of myths about fate and the human spirit. But you cannot bury the truth forever. In the 1840s, Babbage's secret notes were discovered by Ada Lovelace. She saw between the lines. She saw the ghost of the Napoleonic AI. She was trying to warn us. Do you think the technology just stayed in a vault? Look at the founding of the modern world. Look at the families who controlled the first banks of the 19th century. The same families who funded the British Babbage project. They used the Napoleonic logic to manipulate stock markets for 100 years before the first electronic computer was ever built. The algorithms we use today, the ones that decide what you buy and who you vote for, are the direct descendants of Project Arithmetic. We haven't invented anything new. We have just finally rediscovered what Napoleon found in the pyramids. And you will be surprised, but among the descendants of Napoleon's secret team of calculators, there are at least 3 people who today hold the highest positions in the world's leading AI companies. The lineage of the brass mind is still alive. I have found the original perforated cards from the Battle of Austerlitz. I have found the 1804 blueprints for the steam processor that the Louvre keeps in a restricted basement. I have scanned these documents and uploaded the photos of the Napoleon Code that no history book will ever show you. Their names, the secret location of the remains of the Grand Controller, and the terrifying link to a modern-day billionaire. I have laid it all out in the main channel. The link is in my profile. Go there now before the controllers of today decide that this video has revealed too much. History is not what you think. History is a calculation, and the calculation is almost complete.